to this session. Before the lecture will begin, I would like to remind you that the sponsors of ENPOSS 2017 conference are Narodowy Bank Polski, Polish National Bank, City of Kraków. You will have an opportunity to watch a short movie about this city after the lecture. And District Bar Council in Kraków, which invites us for catching its piano concert this evening. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a great honor to welcome Professor Anna
Doctor, not Professor.
Alexandrova from University of Cambridge. Her research focuses on the philosophy of social and psychological sciences, with particular interest in two areas, models in economics and the science of well-being. Her book, A Philosophy for the Science of Well-being, has been just published. Today, Professor Alexandrova will consider the problem are social scientists experts on values.
Thank you so much.
The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomek. Can I have my slides?
Of course.
Many thanks. It's very, very special to be here, really, for at least 3 reasons. First, because it's not, thank you for pointing that out. That's right, so 3 reasons for why it's extra special being here. First is because it's ENPOSS, and ENPOSS's predecessor, the Philosophy of Social Science Roundtable, gave me my start in life, my very first conference presentation in 2003 in St. Louis, and Paul was there. Second, because, because so many of my teachers and inspirations are in the audience. I grew up and came to love philosophy of social science through the textbooks of Dan Little and Dan Hausman. And thirdly, because it's Poland, really, and I came to love philosophy of social science because I came of age with the collapse of the Soviet bloc. So, which was, I think I had an experience which many of the Polish people and my Polish colleagues shared, which is trying to figure out in those days, in the 90s, who is the expert and who is a fake and who can be trusted for everything to do with social science and economy. And in particular, whether the expert can be identified by the values that they hold. So this is why I take up this topic today, whether social sciences are experts not just on facts, but also on values. So a very personal topic in many ways. So before I present my own argument, I think it's worth mentioning how very important this question was to many philosophers of social science, and one that isn't often mentioned as a philosopher of social science is Mary Hesse, who just died last year after a long and wonderful life. And she taught in my department, and we held a memorial session, which gave me an opportunity to learn a lot about her views on social sciences. So, in particular, one of her old students, a sociologist, a great sociologist, Michael Power, brought her old syllabus for philosophy of social science from the 70s. And I jumped on the opportunity to take a picture. And I think this is a good audience to share how philosophy of social science was taught in Cambridge in the 70s, and which is really, which I think was quite a widespread formula. So as you see, she starts the course with kind of the conventional vision of what natural sciences are, the positivist view. She goes on and debunks it, And the point of it is to show that the very same problems that arise in the natural sciences, in fact, also arise in the social sciences. So she was a naturalist in that way. And then she goes on and considers some of the, very core issues in philosophy of social sciences, such as methodological individualism, holism, rationality, relativism. So fairly conventional. This is how I then learned this. My teacher in LSE. So perhaps this is where it comes from. So this looks pretty conventional. I think philosophy of social science has moved on in many ways. We no longer consider social science as a single kind that focuses on a single set of problems, or at least I thought this question was over, but then Dan revived it nicely yesterday, that perhaps there is something to be said about social sciences in common. But her views on values in social science, they don't sound nearly as dated as this syllabus. So one of the papers she assigns is this one, Theory and Value in Social Sciences, which came out in this volume, edited in '78 by Hookway and Pettit, familiar names to philosophers of social science. And it is in this essay that she articulates what she sees as a very special place that values have for social sciences. So her argument is that in natural sciences, even though we should reject all the standard criteria such as falsifiability and the deductive nomological view as criteria of scientificness, there is this pragmatic criterion, which is prediction and control, which has a property, she believed, of weeding out value judgments over time. And social sciences don't have that criterion, and this is why they have a special relationship with values. So she concluded that social science is unavoidably also, and rightly, a political conversation. Here's a concluding passage from that chapter. The proposal of a social theory is more like the arguing of a political case than like a natural science explanation. It should seek for and respect the facts when these are to be had, but it cannot await a possibly unattainable total explanation. It must appeal explicitly to value judgments and may properly use persuasive rhetoric. No doubt it should differ from most political argument in seeking and accounting for facts more conscientiously and in constraining its rhetoric this side of gross special pleading and rabble-rousing propaganda. She goes on to say that just because social sciences have been most affiliated with revolutionary left, it doesn't mean they have to be, don't we know? And she concludes that, at least in the sciences of man, a sense of truth that is not properly pragmatic may be derivable from prior commitment to values and goals. So, as you see, she very much saw a special role for values in social sciences. And I think in this passage, she kind of vacillates between saying that it's a good thing and that it's an inevitable handicap. It seems that she believes that natural sciences are better off for having what she calls the pragmatic criterion. But then she also says that it's right that social sciences should have a special relationship to values. And that's, if you know anything about Mary Hesse, it's no surprise because she adopted a theory of truth following Habermas, deliberative consensus theory, and of course, values would be included in that theory. So let's think about this passage from point of view of today. I think conversation about values in the philosophy of science has moved on a great deal. And what seemed very controversial then perhaps might not seem so controversial today, now that we have a few decades of sociological and feminist thinking about the inevitable and rightful role of value judgments in scientific research. But nevertheless, this is pretty bold stuff she's saying, right? Social sciences being a political conversation. So my plan today is to draw an implication that many, even those who are open to the idea of value-ladenness in science and social science, including Hesse herself, would probably worry about concluding, and that is that scientists, in virtue of their work, might be experts also on questions of values. By values here, I mean judgments about not what is true and simple and explanatory, but rather judgments about what is good and right and beautiful and fair. So what some have called non-epistemic judgments. So I want to first offer an argument, which I call argument from measurement, which I see as a argument for value-ladenness of science on a par with argument from underdetermination and inductive risk, which, however, has this extra implication of expertise about values. I want to then explore some parallels of this argument with two other philosophical discussions. First one is holist epistemology, that some have called web of belief, as in values and belief, and an argument from indispensability arguments in philosophy of mathematics that also want to conclude from indispensability of mathematical objects to their reality. So there are parallels, analogies and disanalogies between this argument of mine and those other ones. And I also want to conclude by thinking all the dangers of this idea, right? And whether we should try and stay away from attributing to social scientists expertise about values. Okay, so without further ado, here's the argument. Let me just now read it, state it, and then I'll go premise by premise, justifying it. Premise one, scientists sometimes So let me go into details on each of the premises. In premise one, I have in mind some very familiar cases of thick concepts in social sciences, to use the term of Bernard Williams. Thick concepts are concepts in which the evaluative and the descriptive seems to be entangled, and meta-ethicists spend a lot of ink arguing whether or not it can be properly disentangled. and what precisely are the semantics for thick concepts. But all we need to note here is how many of such apparently thick concepts have been noted by many colleagues all across social sciences. And I should mention that social sciences are not at all unique in having thick concepts. I think environmental sciences and biological and medical ones are also full of them. So in the social sciences, we've got poverty, unemployment, inflation, growth, frailty, rape, violence, legitimacy, well-being. I say maybe also health and crime, and that's because for both health and crime, there are some strong cases defending a value-free conception of them. So Dan Hausman, among others, has a value-free definition of health. And there are lots of people who disagree with him, but nevertheless. And of course, the great tradition of legal positivism defines crime in entirely value-free terms as just violations of laws, whatever they are. But in the cases of well-being, the thickness is pretty easy to see. So, for example, one common measure of subjective well-being is known as the satisfaction with life scale. And it gets people to, in about 5 questions, to rate their overall judgment of whether their life is going according to their ideals. And it's pretty obvious what the value judgment is in the use of the questionnaire such as satisfaction with life scale. It's just answers to SWS are valid indicators of well-being, which presupposes that it is good for a person to judge her life as living up to some ideal that she has adopted, right? So to give you an example of how this works out, a judgment like this, here's a very recent article that captured by Maya Tamir and her colleagues, team of psychologists. It's captured so much attention. Suddenly, I, for some reason, was getting requests for an interview about why this is such a good study. And the reason why journalists cite it is because it shows that it's okay to be miserable for happiness. So in particular, what the study is supposed to show is if you experience more emotions that you think are desirable given your value commitments. You know, if you live in an individualistic country and you might want, and you endorse the culture, you might want to experience fewer, whatever you think is communitarian emotions. So if your emotions are go step in step with your normative and political and cultural commitments, then even though if those emotions are negative, they do contribute to your happiness, where happiness is judged by satisfaction with life scale, among other things, and also rates of depression. So here, clearly, there is this big value judgment that happiness is a matter of being satisfied with life, and there's a big tradition in philosophy of well-being that argues against this view. Most notably, Dan Habron is, I think, makes a very compelling case for happiness being more of an emotional state than a cognitive state, if it is anything. So, now, let me tell you about premise 2. As you recall, premise 2 was about validation of scales, which require judgments of values as well as of facts. I'm just going to give you lots of examples of how scales are validated in the social and medical sciences from a discipline called psychometrics, sometimes clinimetrics, which philosophers don't talk about very much. Philosophers of science shamefully ignore, I think. It's full of, it's fit for philosophical consumption, psychometrics, I declare. Right, so the job of psychometricians is to come up with valid questionnaires, mostly it's questionnaires, for measuring all the things that we want to be measuring. To give you some examples, here is a development and validation of a mental well-being scale in Singapore. As you see, it takes usually several scientists on a team to prepare the questionnaires, to make sure it reflects properly the concept, and to show it has reliability and validity. I'll tell you a little bit about it shortly. Here is an example of the famous Warwick-Edinburgh mental well-being scale, which is currently the most popular measure for not just well-being, but also mental health. That's why it's called mental well-being rather than subjective well-being. Used in the UK and increasingly other places. And one of the authors on this article, the last one, Sarah Stewart Brown, is the one who goes out and defends this measure publicly against various attacks by psychiatrists who think that mental health should just be an absence of psychiatric disease and nothing more. A couple more examples. Development and validation of a short measure of functioning and well-being for individuals with Parkinson's disease. That's in quality of life research. The WHO 10 well-being index validation in diabetes. I'm showing it to you just so that you could see what a load of scientific effort goes to questionnaire validation. I know that there are people in the audience who do that too, Ricardo. So I suppose I should say exactly how this is done before I leave. Well, the overall schema is to first develop a questionnaire that is sufficiently representative of the phenomenon in question, given the views of all to whom the questionnaire developers grant some expertise on the topic. And increasingly, that includes not just doctors and social workers, but also patients themselves. And then once we stabilize the concept with a bunch of questionnaire items, and these questionnaire items are administered to lots and lots of people, and then lots and lots of statistical analysis reveals which of those questionnaire items are the most best predict the overall outcome, which ones, whether they're reliable, whether they fit test-retest considerations. And, you know, in the end, the statistical information about reliability and validity of questionnaire items gets checked against the initial intuitions about what questionnaire items should represent a concept. So then I know my colleagues who do psychometric validation then go through the items and see whether the numerical score on the item fits also their judgment of whether or not it should be on the questionnaire. So this is the big, complex material epistemology of well-being measurement and other thick concepts. measurement. Much ignored, to my sadness, by philosophers. Premise 3, to remind you, is validation of these scales is sometimes successful in that it provides knowledge of valid measures of these phenomena. So you could give 2 readings, really, to this premise, obviously a crucial premise for me. A weaker reading is just that some measures are better validated than others, and a stronger reading is possible to conclusively validate a measure. Very few people in the discipline of psychometrics and clinimetrics maintain the strong version, but the weak version, it's very hard to deny, right? That, and the enormous scientific effort that goes into construction of the questionnaires certainly works on the assumption that it's not futile. And the weak version is plenty enough for me. Basically, what I want is to have some kind of a condition of, some kind of possibility of success of this whole enterprise. And that's what premise 3 does. Let me discuss an objection to premise 3, which is that what gets validated is a questionnaire assuming a certain set of value judgments. What gets validated is not the value judgments along with the questionnaire. So this is Martin Seligman, one of the big pioneers of positive psychology, speaking to New York Times about his work in 2011. My view of positive psychology is that it describes rather than prescribes what human beings do, he says. I don't want to mess with people's values. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing to want to win for its own sake. I'm just describing what lots of people do. One's job as a therapist is not to judge what people value, but given what they value, to make them better at it. Let me call that the value-free vision of validation. And the thought is that somebody else, not the scientist, or the scientist qua somebody else, qua, not the scientist, qua citizen, philosopher, decides what the appropriate values are, and then it's the job of psychometrician, positive psychologist, clinimetrician to work out what a good measure of that thing is. So I think this is, there are very good reasons for why Seligman is going to come out for such a view. And you might guess that if you know the sort of scandals that his work has been involved with, you know, well, not directly, but it seems that indirectly positive psychology was used by US Army to provide not only resilience training for its soldiers, but also to devise better torture techniques. And I think this is a general point. This is nothing, this is not just an unlucky incident. It is a very, we should never be all rosy glasses about, about positive psychology. It is very often a tool of control and surveillance, both in the business sphere, in commerce. It's, you know, its roots are designed to make us buy more things, make us better workers, design which ones are the better workers, etc. So positive psychology is very much not an innocent enterprise. And I think Martin Seligman is trying to make it look innocent by adopting the value-free ideal, but it's entirely disingenuous, I say. And that is because it takes so much honest, good work to figure out what goes into a questionnaire. And, and scientists very proudly put work in this and try to make these decisions in the best possible way to inform themselves of the widest possible perspective on, say, frailty, you know, talk to lots and lots of frail people if they want to measure frailty. And I just can't believe that this is an entirely, well, that this is not part of measurement. The whole enterprise wouldn't make sense on the value-free ideal. I think if scientists know, if validation at all makes sense, then scientists know not just causes and effects and causes and consequences of certain phenomena that on other grounds we identify as valuable. Rather, they know causes and consequences of valuable phenomena such as well-being. Otherwise, it just, so yeah, there are lots and lots of political reasons for why Martin Seligman would put forward a value-free vision of psychometrics, and it's just not true. So if scientists do know anything on the basis of validation, they know value-laden facts. So that's it for my three premises. So let me just restate the argument and extend it a bit more. Scientists sometimes aim at measuring phenomena defined in evaluative terms. Evaluation of scales of these phenomena requires judgments of values as well as of facts. Validation of these scales is sometimes successful, and that provides knowledge of valid measures of these phenomena. From that, I conclude, to this extent, validation supplies knowledge about values as well as of facts. And then if you add a very plausible, well, not a complete, but a plausible minimalist definition of expertise is just relative possession of knowledge relative to others, then social measurement does produce expertise about values, it follows. So I'm going to spend the rest of the talk thinking about this conclusion that many of you, including myself, would find really rather uncomfortable in some ways, even though I defend the soundness of it. So let's consider a couple of parallel arguments. It's not like I'm the first one arriving at this view in philosophy. I think the main parallel argument is from holist epistemology. So all the epistemologists, including the feminist epistemologists that were inspired by Quinean web of belief, have gone on to expand it, not to web of belief, but to web of valif, which is a term by Miriam Solomon. And she attributes this argument to a couple of epistemologists, including in the feminist tradition. And I think we should also mention that in the last decades of Hilary Putnam's writings, he urged this greater union between economics and ethics, and very much did believe in something like a scientific expertise about values, or that it's appropriate to adopt an epistemic attitude rather than just sort of an emotional attitude towards value claims. So roughly the view is that value judgments are not fact-free, and factual judgments are not value-free, and it's all one big soup together that gets confirmed. Now this sounds awfully abstract, and it's really good to look at an example. What is this? This is not me trying to sell you anything. I can promise that. This is an article that was a big inspiration for me by Elizabeth Anderson, a great epistemologist, philosopher of social science, feminist scholar, or article from Hypatia. I know lots of people in the audience have written about it, including Sharon. So in this article, Uses of Value Judgments in Science, a general argument with lessons from a case study of feminist research divorce, Anderson argues that in the 70s and 80s, they started a new tradition in sociology when scholars who identified themselves explicitly as feminists started addressing traditional topics such as divorce. And rather than defining divorce as a trauma and a loss, and they defined it in accordance with the values that they held dear, feminist values. And they thought it doesn't have to be a trauma, it could be an opportunity for renewal and independence. So they devised their methods in accordance with these values, and they found out lots of things about how families bounce back or don't bounce back, the effect on children. And Anderson is adamant in this article, and she makes a very convincing case that feminists were not, feminist epistemologists, feminist sociologists who started studying divorce did not try to find facts that suit feminist ideology that they held dear. Rather, feminism for them informed a range of methods that they adopted. So, for example, they were measuring effects of divorce not just right after, which is the most traumatic moment, but later on also. And, you know, when they saw trauma, they didn't deny it. So it's not like being a feminist makes you try and find, you know, things about divorce that you believe should be the case but aren't really there. She says there is no wishful thinking, at least in the best cases of this research. And it's very easy to extend this argument to social measurement. Values inform validation, but they are not what's being tested, right? Tested is whether the construct informed by a set of values behaves in a way that respects total evidence. And whatever values enter into test design then get confirmed as appropriate for this concept, for this context, because the whole package gets confirmed. So this is this is to show that the web of belief argument definitely has affinities with the argument from measurement that I presented. And you might also think that there are other parallels. So the other argument that I want to consider is the argument from indispensability in mathematics. So this is the standard formulation by Mark Collivan from the Stanford Encyclopedia. It goes like this. We ought to have ontological commitments to all and only entities that are indispensable to our best scientific theories. Mathematical entities are indispensable to our best scientific theories, therefore we ought to have ontological attitude to mathematical entities. So here I want to say that the argument from measurement is very different. So first of all, the hope of indispensability theorists is very much to prove an ontological commitment true. So whereas I don't want to do this, I'm not going to say that just because values are indispensable to scientific research and best scientific research is confirmed, values therefore are real. This is a second order claim about reality of values, right? I think what argument from measurement does purport to show is that it's possible to adopt a first order attitude that to certain values, such as that, you know, subjective well-being counts for overall well-being. That's a value judgment that might get confirmed in through validation of scales. But this is different from saying, therefore, values are real. So the fact that you could take an a first-order epistemic commitment towards an object is not the same as saying that, therefore, it refers to some mind-independent reality. So I wouldn't want to be in the company of indispensability theorists for my purposes. So I think it's a disanalogy, but then of course there are lots of people who don't think that the indispensability argument goes through. There are lots of critiques of it. I have my own favorite objection against the indispensability arguments. But I mean, I could address that in the Q&A. All this is to say now that I don't mean to make that for values. Don't want to. Okay, but still, the conclusion is pretty uncomfortable, though, because even if you grant the sort of dissimilarity with with the web of belief and dissimilarity with the indispensability argument, my argument certainly does indeed imply a certain commitment to adequacy of certain value judgments in science. And I think it's an uncomfortable conclusion that would make Mary Hesse probably uncomfortable too, though I don't know. I wish I had discussed it with her. She was as sharp and philosophical up until the end. I very much understand the discomfort of the reaction because I think lay criticism of science on the basis of values has been some of the best developments in philosophy of science and science and technology studies. So we have then a puzzle. The argument from measurement, as do other arguments, appears to show that scientists can take an epistemic stance towards values. Epistemic stance can be believe, accept, whatever you prefer. But then we also want to say that revision of these values by lay outsiders or not so lay philosophers is also a good thing. So how can we have both? Isn't it a dangerous idea to grant scientists expertise about their evaluative knowledge? I say probably not as dangerous as it looks, and let me tell you why. So this is Arthur Lupia, a political scientist from Michigan. There's lots of Michigan people I've been mentioning today. And this is him speaking to the AAAS Association a few years ago, explaining how social science research can inform government policy. He's a great believer in trying to recover a sense of social scientific expertise in the public sphere, and very good at it. He said, government decisions often rely on evaluations of past actions, said Lupia. Lots of people give evaluations, both in politics and on television. There are many evaluations about the main questions of our day, and so as we think about the present and the future, the question that we might ask is, which evaluations should we believe? The value of social research to government performance is that it is a source of credible and legitimate evaluations. So note two things about Lupia's claim. First, maybe that's just how I like to read it, but he kind of gave it to me by using the term evaluation. He is clear that science produces evaluations and not just factual claims. The examples he gives is whether the Obama-era surge in Afghanistan has worked, has achieved government objectives. And he also, the second thing he claims is that he doesn't deny that others can make these evaluations too. So presumably challenging the scientist's evaluation, but still, he wants to grant it some special authority. let me see how I can allay along these lines the discomfort you might have about argument from measurement. So the first thing to note is that granting scientists an expertise about values is not as controversial as it sounds, because it's only granting expertise about a very specific kind of value claim, which is the best way to measure socially valuable outcomes. And note that these are not claims about how we ought to live our lives, and they're not claims about what is the right thing to do. In fact, they're not always claims about what is good for you as an individual. They're claims about best way of measuring socially valuable outcomes. And the second thing is that granting expertise about values is only controversial if we grant it to social scientists and no one else. And that, I think, would be clearly wrong. So there are two traps I don't want to fall in. One is Plato's, to think that there are philosopher kings, or in that case, scientist kings, best suited to making evaluations. And the other trap that I don't want to fall in is John Stuart Mill's, which is the individual and only the individual themselves is capable of judging what is good for themselves. Right? So neither extreme is right. I think the expertise about what is good, in particular, is distributed, and lots of people have it. And the thought would be that scientists who develop valid questionnaires have a special expertise about how to develop valid questionnaires, and I have a special expertise about what is good for my 9-year-old. He really wants me to help him put his gaming videos on YouTube so he could collect likes, and I very worry about this. I don't want to expose him too early to this world. And I make decisions about what is good for me and my family and my students all the time, and I make a mess of it sometimes, but I do have some special expertise about it. So, which is not to say that a positive psychologist with a well-validated measure of X doesn't have special expertise about what X is, when X is denoted by a thick concept. Right? So this is my attempt to allay this, the worry, and also my attempt to show just how incredibly valuable outside critique has been to social measurement. So here are examples I've collected. I'm sure there are more, but Dan Hausman's analysis of that famous World Bank memo about pollution, which is now translated into Polish. That's really great. So I teach it to my students. You can teach it to yours. Is a wonderful analysis of moral judgments in a rhetoric disguised in an entirely sort of value-free and scientific way. Similarly, philosophical analysis of cost-benefit techniques is also a great example of that. Of course, feminist critique of definitions of labor. That's a fantastic example of a lay or not so lay critique of scientific measurement. The patient empowerment movement in healthcare, community, environmentalism, these are all great examples of people who are affected by science coming and challenging scientists on how to measure that thing that they claim to be measuring. And in well-being research, which is what I've spent my time thinking about lately, the simple argument has been, of this sort has been very important. you used life satisfaction data in your study, Dr. Scientist, but I have reasons to believe that life satisfaction is not well-being. This is a perfectly good, well-formed argument, and it works for criticism. So I certainly want to be able to preserve that as some of the most positive developments for science and philosophy of science. So, and finally, I think it would be good also to still press harder on the discomfort, the darker side of the argument from measurement. I think I'm just being fair. And indulge me, please. I'm going to go into a bit of a Russian example here. As people in Poland very well know, in Russia, the discipline of history is a greatly political subject. History, especially history of World War II, and probably nothing as much as history of World War II, is used as a justification of de facto invasion of Ukraine. It is used for intimidation of neighbors and for many other things, such as patriotic education. So, and no other person has contributed more to, well, probably there is another person, but I don't want to mention, is our culture minister, Vladimir Medinsky. So he is a scholar himself, and he is a historian, and this is him with his book, which is about, it's called Myths About Russia, and which is the basis of his dissertation, in which he argues about all the ways in which foreign travelers have over time described Russia, and he thinks that their descriptions have been used for colonization of Russia and all sorts of other nefarious deeds, and I'm sure he's probably right to some extent. But what is interesting about this case is that professional historians have come down very strongly against this book. You know, it has some very irresponsible archival practices. It is truly very bad about citation of other people, not to go further. And one thing they said is that, well, it violates canons of scientific and historical objectivity. So Medinsky is not going to go and address the specific criticisms. He's far too busy for that. But he relished the opportunity to talk about objectivity. Oh boy, he did. So, and this is what he said in a newspaper, in Российская газета. What do you mean one should not approach historiography from the point of view of national interest? Why is that pseudoscientific? This is totally beyond me. Excuse me, maybe I should translate it as pardon. From the point of view of whose national interest should I approach the history of my fatherland? So I think this is a lovely example of very intellectual ideas that we didn't think would get out of the academy when scholars first put them forward, but are now used nicely for nefarious purposes. So these are familiar thoughts, right? That no facts are free from perspectives, that biases enable progress of knowledge, that this is all kosher and all right. And this is a very similar critique of objectivity that you now see coming out of various propaganda outlets such as Russia Today and other local sort of press and TV. So, I mean, if argument from measurement puts me in this uncomfortable alliance with patriotic history, what am I going to do, right? So how can I resist it? I'm going to. So there's one thing I don't want to conclude, is Medinsky being an expert on values. I could say, one obvious thing, that this is strictly not a question of measurement, right, that he is addressing. He is not trying to measure, engage in the sort of projects that I describe psychometricians to engage in. He's doing history. But I think that would be a Weasley way of going about it, so because he could claim that, well, I have a conceptualization of national interest, right? It is aligned to a certain ideology. And, you know, if I go about and produce a psychometric measure of national interest, then you're going to have to buy it if I validate it with your argument from measurement. What am I going to say to that? Well, so the web of belief response, which is what Elizabeth Anderson would do, is the problem is not the value judgments as much as their dogmatic treatment. So to remind you, she's gone to great length to distinguish between the responsible and irresponsible ways in which values could be used in science, and her story is the same always, right? If facts are not free of values and values are not free of facts, then confirmation of these things have to go together, and you cannot be dogmatic about any one of them. Still, I think it's not going to be that easy for a holist epistemologist to reject Medinsky as an expert on values, and that's because holist epistemology is always quite friendly to different value judgments, right? And different judgments about what package is going to work out in the end, one way or the other. So I think I'm going to look for other ways of resisting Medinsky, and there are other ways. I mean, so I think his value ladenness is the least of his problems, right? The bigger problem is the very idea of a state-sanctioned history that it gets used for bullying, both internal and external, and the very idea of state-sanctioned history in schools. I take it that's happening in Poland too, from conversation with Mateusz yesterday. So I think there are ways for the advocate of argument from measurement to resist, to claim that Medinsky is no expert on values. But I'll probably just conclude at this point. So this is my recent book, that measurement of well-being can result in a specific scientific expertise about well-being, which, however, does not evaluate other kinds of expertise about well-being. And in this talk, I've tried to generalize this argument to thick concepts in general. So if we are prepared to grant value ladenness of social measurement, and if we are prepared to grant adequacy conditions for social measurement, then I don't see how we can avoid some kind of a conclusion, such as the expertise about values, scientific expertise about values. But we should always remember what a limited expertise it is and the ways it can be challenged. Thank you for your attention. I'm so nervous.
Thank you, Anna. This was a great talk, very interesting. I was a little puzzled about one thing you said fairly early on, and I think it might, if you could elaborate a little bit, it might help me understand your general position a bit better. The quote, the Seligman quote.
The Seligman quote.
Yes. I am certainly not going to defend him or anything, and I don't really have any stakes here, but I didn't read this quote as saying that there are no value judgments in validation. Rather, it seemed to me that what he's saying is obviously, or at least, I don't know what he's saying. Let's say I don't know what he's saying, but I would like to give a different reading and then attach a question to it, which is, obviously there are values deeply ingrained in these big concepts. And, but as a therapist, whether somebody comes in this practice and says, happiness means subjective well-being to me, or whether it means happiness means is some kind of more cognitive concept, for Seligman, that doesn't matter as long as he can help this person achieve their goal. And so but that doesn't seem to be saying anything about measurement. So my follow-up question is, so let's say we have these two concepts of happiness, and we have two tests, and we're trying to validate them. Are you suggesting that one of them will objectively, will fare better because the one scientist's values ultimately are the right ones? And I just, I wasn't sure whether, how that point related to validation. Because, you might end up with two well-validated but conflicting concepts of happiness. And then what does, so do you, and then by your argument, they're both well-validated, and so you do have two concepts with two different sets of values ingrained in them.
That's right, yeah.
And what do you do with that kind of relativism, I guess, is my question.
Thank you. Good. So first, let's be fairer to Seligman. Here's the first line is worse than the rest, right? My view of positive psychology is that it describes rather than prescribes. So I hope you'd agree that this is that's wrong. But the bit later on, you're right, that basically articulates what I take it as the non-directive view of therapy, which is a good thing. And I recently took a course in mentorship, and I was taught that you should be non-directive as a mentor. You should help people to achieve their goals rather than impose your own. That's obviously a good thing, right? I don't know that positive psychology is, that the ideal of measurement is a descriptive ideal, right? So let's give him the second half, but not the first half. But yeah, what do you do with the two measures? Well, I think usually what scientists do is they acknowledge the disagreement there, and they try to find other pragmatic reasons for why a certain measure is better than another for a given population. Right? So I would certainly, there'll be lots of room for pluralism on that ground, right? But I guess, I'm going to have to say that, given the same concept and given two measures with distinct value judgments and given no other pragmatic considerations, then one has to be better than another. Thank you. This is hard.
Thank you. We have plenty of questions. First of all, it was someone here. Yeah? Okay. Then you.
Okay, thank you for this paper. It was very interesting. Some people care a lot about football and the different kinds of people, right? There are optimists and pessimists. The optimists always say, yes, we will win the next game, and the pessimist says, but look at our goalkeeper, and things like that. And that's not just about the future, but also in terms of their estimates, how good their football team is, right? There are people who say, well, it's the optimist and the pessimist, right, will have different views about that. And so when we want to find out about how good a football team is, right, we have to, I don't know, there are also then independent pundits, and we have to form a view ourselves, right? But there are the optimists who overestimate and the pessimists who underestimate. And this is about the favorite football team. But if I talk about my favorite person, which, that's not very good. If I just talk about me, right? How good not how good is my football team, but how good is my life, right? There are also, I think, just in terms of character, there are optimists and pessimists, and one person will overestimate and the other underestimate. So is there a way, right? If that's the case, if there is something like optimism or pessimism that influences how one evaluates one's own life, then so just asking people, how do you feel? That's a methodology, right, that cannot capture the optimist and the pessimist. So what the social scientist investigates, right, is the judgments that people have about well-being, but that doesn't seem to make him an expert about well-being, right? It makes him an expert about judgments of well-being. Similarly, right, and then I stop, right? If you think another thick concept, right? For example, inequality, right? Inequality is also a concept, right? That has lots of, it's a thick concept, right? It has a political dimension, and it's a very, measuring inequality is very interesting, right? And a very theoretical task. And it's not that we go about, I mean, that plays some role there, that we ask people, how is this more unequal than that? But in the end, it's a question of economic and philosophical theory, right? And so again, the questionnaire methodology would only give us judgments, but not the theory. Well, in the end, right, so social scientists, it seems to me, are experts about judgments of well-being, but not experts about well-being, if what I say before is correct.
Thank you. So if they were mere experts about judgment or well-being, they wouldn't go to such great length to make sure they include all the right questions on their questionnaires. So otherwise, they would just sort of describe how people describe their well-being. This is not what happens. When you need a quality of life measure for life with a disease, a great deal of work goes into making sure that it's not just the judgments, it's all the relevant considerations for life with diabetes, say. This is to say that the pure sort of let's describe judgments doesn't describe their goals very much. It doesn't describe, and it doesn't describe what they're trying to do. But I think your skepticism is perhaps there isn't a single scale of individual well-being to evaluate a whole life. And that I'm perfectly happy with, but I don't think this is what the goal of sciences of well-being is. The goal of sciences of well-being is to have far more specific and more circumscribed measures for, I'm very pessimistic about anyone who claims they can have measure of overall well-being, let alone life well-being. So they're much. Your objections are valid, but that's not what they're hoping to do. The good ones, anyway.
Two microphones. Thank you for a really interesting talk. I have a small clarification question, more about the target of your argument than anything else. You noted also that biology and the environmental sciences and medical sciences also have lots of thick concepts. But then why then do you confine the kind of conclusion of your argument to social measurement rather than the measurement of thick concepts in general? Yeah. I mean, at the very end, you mentioned kind of community environmentalism and patient empowerment, which might hint that your answer to this is yes, but I mean, the question is, does your argument also imply that some biologists, some environmental scientists, and some medical scientists are also experts in value? And I guess if you answer yes to this, your position becomes even closer to the rest of the feminist epistemology.
No reason other than this is a philosophy of social science conference. Yeah. That was quick. Yeah, possibly.
Thanks loads, Anna. That's a wonderful talk. I wonder whether the terminology you used makes your conclusions more alarming than your conclusions actually are. It seemed to me that the central claim in your paper was that validation constitutes an argument for the correctness of the values that were used. It wasn't clear to me how strong an argument that is, whether it's a decisive argument or just a consideration. But to speak of scientists having an expertise about values suggests, first of all, kind of knowing how as well as a knowing that. And it suggests that if we go to the scientists and ask them any evaluative question whatsoever, the scientist is going to be in a better position, which is, of course, not at all what you were saying. It's rather, it seems to me that the claim about expertise is no more than the claim that validation consists of some argument in support of the values that were implicit in, that were validated.
I'll take that. Thank you. This is much better. I think there'll still be some uncomfortable people who would say that I still think it's possible to reformulate my ideas. So, say Medinsky went ahead and devised a measure of Russian national interest. I'd have to step over myself a couple of times to admit that he has expertise about how to measure national interest. Something very uncomfortable about it.
Thanks. Yeah, so my question goes a little bit in the same direction as Professor Hausman's question. So I was thinking during your talk, when you were presenting the arguments, all right, like it's indeed sound, but it seems to me that it could also work for a variety of other arguments, such as like phenomenological introspection, conceptual analysis, lay reasoning about well-being, could probably all also constitute a particular kind of knowledge about well-being. So my question, in a sense, is about your fourth premise. So it's like an expertise consists of relative, relative knowledge compared to other people. And so later in your talk, you started to talk about lay criticism of measurements of well-being. And maybe I just didn't understand how that doesn't undermine your fourth premise. Because if indeed there's also other valid arguments, and you do have lay criticism that is valid, to what extent is there still like a relative knowledge that scientists really have there? Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. That's a big one, William. Gosh, yeah, I guess you're right. I could formulate it for any forms of knowledge, except there isn't psychometric validation in life often. But there's something like that. I'm getting better and better at identifying the overall well-being of the person I live with, things like that. So long as I have a relative definition of expertise, I guess I'm just going to have to go the Dan way and be very specific about that this is an expertise about what value judgments should be part of validation procedure, and say that sort of narrowly circumscribe that territory and not let anyone else in it. In that case, I can maintain. I think that you identified a very important tension, and we're going to have to keep talking about it. Thank you.
I wanted to press a bit on this issue of non-epistemic values in contrast to epistemic ones being present here in the evaluation. So what if I play the devil's lawyer and we're going to go against your argument? I would suggest, for instance, that what scientists do, they make examination of the factual claims about what the values are, about the given values in the world, how they are applied or what they are constituted by, in which situations, etc. But this kind of research is primarily underlined by epistemic values. So if scientists have good reasons to believe that well-being is this and that, they have good reasons which are underlined by a specific methodology, which itself is guided by certain epistemic values. So in order that you argue, for instance, this is a good definition of well-being, or this is a good criterial framework via which we will apply our evaluations, in order to have arguments for this, we have been guided by certain epistemic values, like a very clear methodology. Let's say we have a very good explanatory framework, we have conducted very good experiments, etc. So now the question comes, if we have very good methodology underlined by epistemic values, and we have come up to this criteria framework for what constitutes well-being, etc., where is this point where non-epistemic values really kick in? Because if it's all about primarily epistemic values, then the whole discussion isn't controversial to begin with. So this is...
Thank you. Thank you. That's lovely. I mean, I guess I'll just put forward this list and ask you to formulate for each one of these examples how epistemic values can help us to formulate better cost-benefit analysis, better definitions of labor, better measures of health-related quality of life, better measurement of environmental outcomes. I'm just completely pessimistic that epistemic values are anywhere near articulated and strong enough to make this possible. And I don't think even scientists would deny this. So I guess I'm much less optimistic than you are about the power of epistemic values. And and that's not even touching that. I don't see why epistemic values are any less less uncontroversial than non-epistemic ones.
Just a quick follow-up. So I just don't understand that. I agree with everything, but the way we define certain values, which may be very well applied in certain way in the society, we have to justify this by an argument.
Yeah.
And where is the point where the non-epistemic values really kick in this argument? Because we have to give a justification.
All the way. I mean, from the beginning up until the end, and there is no point at which, this is why there is no obvious division of labor to be had, other than sort of, because it's through the whole process. There is no point at which, okay, now we are in the business of making a moral judgment, let's get ready for that. It's in the very nature of the process. Oh, that I can defend.
Thank you. Next question from Professor Roth.
And it seemed to me you had the resources in your talk for a much more straightforward response to the Russian historian, and since you didn't use it, I was afraid that perhaps I misunderstood the threat you saw posed by such work. It seemed to me you distinguished very clearly and appropriately between researchers such as feminist researchers who let their values inform their hypotheses, but their conclusions were shaped by the evidence, as opposed to an ideologue who knows the outcome, so to speak, of their inquiry prior to the first visit to the archives. And the feminist research, for example, that you cited, or the well-being research, falls on one side. Ideologically informed research falls on the other. And the straightforward response is, he's not sensitive to the evidence. He knows his conclusions before the fact. But you seem to think it posed more of a threat, and I'm curious to know why.
Thank you. If so, that's great for me. I guess I wish it were so simple. I think holist epistemologists have bitten a big bullet, and that is that different packages can be all right, depending on, so I don't know that, Anderson had made a compelling case for her example of feminist research. I'll probably can make a fairly compelling case for Medinsky, but I don't know whether I'll be able to make that compelling case every time I find an incredibly uncomfortable piece of social measurement. So I suppose you're right that maybe in this case I'm off the hook. I won't always be off the hook, I worry.
Well, I'm not sure whether I'm well get the position of the experts or value experts. Are they themselves value laden or not?
Who?
The experts.
Yeah.
So if they are value laden themselves, so could we expect a disagreement between the experts? Because they might be, and then how to overcome those disagreements?
Yeah.
Hmm?
Good. So very much. There are big disagreements in the well-being sciences, for instance, whether measures of well-being should be measures of overall functioning, so kind of Aristotelian, or whether they should be measures of the subjective state. And experts certainly do disagree there. And the way they resolve these disagreements is often to agree that they're talking about different phenomena. Or else to invoke what I mentioned in response to Uliana's question, all sorts of pragmatic reasons why it doesn't really matter that, you know, if we use one measure or another because they're well correlated. The disagreements will happen, and I don't know that I need to say, you know, unless there are other considerations. Yeah, so I don't know how much room I have with the argument from measurement for a certain kind of pluralism about expert judgments, about value-laden concepts. But I better have it. You're right. I better have it because it seems like the field is rife with them. It goes back to William's question. I appreciate it. I think it all depends what I want to say expertise is, right? Relative to whom and etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Throughout your lecture, I started wondering what you really... I noted kind of different formulations of your main claim. It became clear when you quoted Arthur Lubia. I think what he claims is that social scientists somehow are experts in producing credible and reliable evaluations of actions, which is not the same, I think, as saying that social scientists are experts on values. And near the end, you formulated your main claim differently, like social scientists can claim that they know the best way to measure socially valuable outcomes, which would make experts on social measurements. So, this looks a bit different. Expert on social values, expert on social measurement, expert on producing evaluations of political actions.
Thank you. So I see that as just me making the claim more and more precise, right? So one way of being an expert on values is being an expert on social measurement. And this is what I've had to argue. So it's just the more precise way of saying there are different ways of being an expert on value, and I'm not arguing that social scientists are expert on values in every way, God forbid. But so my concentration on social measurement is because of this, this specific nature of my claim.
Trouble here, for instance, I would certainly not claim that he's an expert on measuring social values. So I think only at first sight there's something similar with him. If you talk about social measurement or about evaluations, he's certainly not an expert. So
I use him an example of an uncomfortable claim to social measurement, because even though he doesn't make it explicitly, he thinks of himself as an expert on what Russian national interest is. And that's a form of a measurement claim.
Thank you very much. I don't see... Yeah, I see. Last two questions.
Thank you for your great talk. I just have a question in terms of to what extent the values keep coming in. So once I pick my definition of well-being, so overall functioning, or whatever they are, then when I formulate my questions for the questionnaires, I mean, values come in when I pick my overall definitions, but do they also come in when I formulate, in light of that conception, my concrete questions? Because if not, you could try to isolate it just to picking the definition.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I think this goes back to my reply, I think, to Dunja's question, all the way. So you have to say, well, I'm going to define, I like Wayne Sumner's theory of well-being, which is authentic happiness. Great, pass on that, Wayne Sumner's book to your local psychology lab and leave. That's not going to work, because you have to then say, well, how are we going to measure authenticity? Because that's another very big issue. And then how are we going to, the passion of a researcher who is interested in a thick concept is, informs everything they do. And I am pessimistic about abilities to specify any kind of division of labor between what's a philosopher going to do and what's a scientist going to do there. Because scientists, qua scientists, keeps making these thick value judgments in the process of measurement.
Your last question.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you for the talk. I think it's a really important question we have to answer, like all of us, all of the social scientists. And I'm personally thankful bringing the Medinsky case, because I think it's very relevant, and it's so telling that it's from the article from Rosyjskie Novosti was 2017, right? So it's pretty recent.
Which one?
His book and the response. This is like 2017, right?
Yeah.
And still, we have the historian society claiming that he's not fulfilling the objectivity requirements, like not calling him bad scientists. And I was thinking, like, how we can resolve these problems in science. And as I see it, in society, most of the cases, we just go to court. And we have some other instances to tell us, like, well, this is how it went, and this is the result. And I was wondering if we have, in a different way, but similar thing going on in science. So, like, the argument on values could only be resolved by other than values arguments. So institutions built to force some values, and in the end, it would be all on the power. So, like, of course, the other historians that will have more seats in an important commission or at the university, or more TV time for the social analysis. So maybe the resolving part, or the judgment, is coming out of this value or even scientific discussion, and maybe we have to search for it in this practical turn which is going on. So I was just interested in your thoughts. Maybe this is the direction we have to go in the end.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Wonderful question. So for this particular case, I think the historians that criticize this scheme are very, very happy to grant that there is no neutral definition of national interest, and they carry on. That's not the failure of objectivity. The failure of objectivity is bad citation practices and shoddy archival work. But your larger issue of resolution of value debates in science as well is bigger than anything I could answer, and I'm quite myself sympathetic to certain pragmatist views about social change that Elizabeth Anderson herself has articulated about the role of social experiments in moral change. And I think there is a way of going about it, but anything I will say would be sort of overly general. And I mean, at scientific level, I think just voicing these disagreements and accepting a certain level of certain common standards of what counts as scientific work, and then facing the fact that these common standards will not always yield full-on agreement is the best we can do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we have to come to the end. Thank you.